Hello everybody and welcome to this video on the AQA GCSE English Language Paper 2 Question 2. So this video is going to be split into two parts. Part 1 I'm going to go through what you have to do for this question and how you'll be marked. And then part 2 will provide you with a practice question which you can work through, and I've also written a sample answer for that question. So first of all, this question assesses assessment objective 1, which is to identify and interpret explicit and implicit information and ideas, and select and synthesize that evidence from the different texts. Now, put simply, that means to select evidence which answers the question, and then you need to make inferences. You need to say what is suggested by the words in the quote, and compare how those quotes and those inferences are different from the other source that you've been given. This question is worth 8 marks, so level 4, which is the top level, is worth 7 to 8 marks. Now, in order to achieve that level, you need to make perceptive inferences, and that means that you need to choose quotations and make suggestions which are beyond the normal. So you need to really consider what those words suggest. You need to choose correct evidence, okay, a variety of evidence, a variety of quotes from those sources, and you also need to actually explicitly say what is different between the texts. Now, the exam boards have tended to focus on what the differences are. However, they have said in some training meetings that they could have a question that is based on the similarities between the sources. So please bear that in mind, although all of the sample questions and the sample assessment papers I've seen always state the differences between the two, not the similarities, but we do need to bear that in mind just in case. So the lowdown on question 2 is that you will be asked to write a summary of the differences or possibly similarities between the two sources, and they are two non-fiction sources on paper 2. So it will focus on both source A and source B, and the main focus is your inference skills and how those inferences are different between the two sources. Now, it's worth 8 marks, which equates to effectively about 10 minutes for this question. And I would say you'd have to aim for about 3 paragraphs for this question. However, if you only wrote 2 and you really went into complex detail with regards to the inferences and the differences or similarities between the sources, and you've spent the 10 minutes, then you need to stop there and don't worry about that 3rd paragraph. So just write as much as you can within that 10 minutes. Now, if we consider what a summary is, it is a brief statement or account of the main points of something. So, in essence, what you're doing is you are reading through the sources and you are then pulling out the main points of that. So, it's almost like when we ask you to summarise a text and you use bullet points. So, that's what effectively you are doing for this. You are pulling out the main points. And in this case, it will be the main differences between the two sources. So the paragraph structure for this question is this, and you can get this as a free download on my website, asiaexams.wordpress.com. So I'm just going to zoom in for you so you can see in detail. So I would start your answer with a very general comment, and the reason why I get my students to do this is because it's a really easy opener for you. Now, some students struggle with not knowing how to start their answer. So immediately, if the question asks you what the differences are between the sources, then you can comment on that general difference. So here I've said both texts discuss the theme of, because they will have a similar theme. However, source A is written in the format of, and source B is written in the format of. So the difference is the way that they are written. So you might get a letter, you might get a diary entry, you might get a newspaper article. So you'll get different formats between the two sources. So just having an opening comment, commenting on that difference, is a really good opener to your answer. Then what you need to do is you need to answer the question itself. So explain what the writer has said, or explain what the main difference is generally. Then you take and then you infer what is suggested by that quote, okay? So we're not dying here. If you've seen my other videos, then you'll see that I always say to die, so define, imply, effect. But we're not doing the define and the effect in this because it's not a high tariff question. All you need to do is just say what the words suggest. So you do your source A first, and then you do your source B. And then at the very end of your paragraph, you write a brief summary, 1 or 2 sentences, and you just need to say what's the difference between these two quotes and how are the inferences different, okay? So each paragraph follows that format, and you only need to have that general comment at the top at the very beginning of your answer. So I've got 2 sources here. Again, these are available on my website. And I'm going to answer the question, or rather just a paragraph of this question, so you can see how that flowchart works in practice. So using details from both sources, write a summary of the differences between how the people with disabilities are treated. So I've got this source, which is from the autobiography My Left Foot by Christy Brown. So that's that's source A, and then source B is about the Elephant Man, okay? So again, you can get those sources as downloads on my website. And this is how I would attempt a paragraph for that question. So my opening statement, again, this comes at the beginning of your answer, would be something like this. Both sources are autobiographical accounts which discuss the theme of disability. However, source A is an extract from the autobiography as someone with a disability, and source B is a doctor's account of his meeting with a disabled person. So immediately I've commented on a difference between the 2 sources. So first of all, my point, so I need to answer the question about how people with disabilities are treated. So I put both texts discuss how people with disabilities are treated with contempt, but to differing extents, and that's my point of difference there about the extent of the contempt that each of them faces. So my quote from source A, so I say the writer of source A states that his mother was deemed to be impertinent for disregarding the doctor's disparaging comments about him. Now what I've done is I've showed greater sophistication by embedding my quote within a sentence there. And I only really need to use 1 or 2 words, so I've just used 1 word there taken from source A to make the point that obviously this person, his mother rather, had quite a few negative comments directed at her son from the doctors that were treating him. And then I've said what my inference is. So I've said suggesting that the man's mother refused to give up hope that her son could live a normal life despite having a disability. Her love was beyond reproach, regardless of the opinions of medical professionals. Okay, so I've looked at that word impertinent and I've considered why she would appear that way and perhaps why she would appear impertinent, why she would be rude, okay, to the doctors. Well, obviously it was because she wouldn't want to hear those things about her son. So I've offered my inference there. Then what I need to do is look at source B and have a point of comparison. I have a comparative discourse marker, so I've put whereas the writer of source B explains that the thing was kept locked up in an empty shop, again using embedded quotations for greater sophistication. And then my inference, implying that the man was being treated like an animal. The locked room leads the reader to believe that he was being held against his will, purely for the benefit of his captors. The absence of a name also suggests that the people thought he was worthless. So I've really considered the fact that he is locked away and the fact that he is called the thing. All right. So it's really being perceptive in your inferences and really considering what those words suggest. And finally, the final part of my paragraph is the summary of difference or similarity if they ask you about similarities. But I bet you bottom dollar it's going to be a summary of differences. So here I have to say, while both texts clearly suggest that people with disabilities were treated as second-class citizens in the late 1800s and early 1900s, It is evident that the disabled man in source A was lucky to have a caring family who supported and protected him. The elephant man, unfortunately, was surrounded by people who exploited his misfortune. So that is the difference between how the elephant man and how the other person is treated. So that's the summary of difference comes at the very end of that paragraph. Okay, so that's the end of part 1. So in part 2, we'll have a look at a practice question for you, and I'll go through the sample answer for that question. Head over to my Twitter feed, AQA Exams, at AQA Exams, where you can ask me loads of questions, and make sure you subscribe to the channel for further updates. Thanks for listening.